On a dark and stormy night, when the wind howled like a soul in pain and the rain lashed the windows with fury, Laura was home alone. She had planned to spend the evening watching movies, but an unsettling feeling kept her on her toes. Something in the atmosphere seemed out of place, as if the shadows had a life of their own. Laura lived in an old country house, far from the city. She had inherited the house from her grandmother, a peculiar woman who always told stories about spirits and mysteries. Although Laura never believed in those legends, that night everything seemed different. After dinner, she settled down on the couch with a blanket and turned on the television. The lights flickered a couple of times before the signal went out. Cursing the bad weather, he decided to read a book. As she flipped through the pages of an old horror novel, she heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. The creaking of wood made her tense up. She thought maybe it was the house adjusting to the cold, but her instincts told her otherwise. Taking a deep breath, she stood up and climbed the stairs. Each step echoed in the silence, amplified by the echo of the hallway. He reached the door to his room and turned the knob slowly. The room was empty, but the chill he felt was unusual. He decided to check the attic, a place he rarely visited. The attic was full of old objects and dusty memorabilia. As she opened the door, an icy draft hit her. Shadows danced in the dim light of her flashlight, creating figures that seemed to move. She scanned the place cautiously, and soon found an old wooden box. It was locked with a rusty padlock, but it looked fragile. He picked the lock and lifted the lid. Inside, there was a worn leather diary and a number of old photographs. The diary belonged to his grandmother. Opening it, he found pages filled with strange stories about the house and its inhabitants. One of the stories described the presence of a spirit trapped in the attic, a tormented soul seeking revenge. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. She slammed the diary shut and decided to go downstairs quickly. As she turned around, she saw a dark figure in the corner of the attic, watching her. Panic overcame her and she ran for the stairs, feeling that something was chasing her. She reached the second floor panting, her heart pounding. She tried to calm down, but the noises would not stop. She heard whispers and footsteps that seemed to surround her. She took refuge in the living room, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The storm outside was getting worse, and the light from the flashes of lightning illuminated the house intermittently, revealing fleeting figures in the shadows. Laura decided to call her best friend, Sarah, but the phone line was dead. She picked up her cell phone, but there was no signal. She felt trapped and vulnerable. Suddenly, all the lights went out, plunging her into total darkness. She turned on her flashlight, but the battery drained quickly, leaving her with the dim candlelight. She heard a loud knock at the front door. With fear gripping her, she slowly approached. The door was ajar, though she remembered locking it. Outside, the rain was pouring down torrentially, and the wind was howling louder. She decided to close the door, but as she did so, she felt a cold hand on hers. She recoiled in terror, but there was no one there. The door slammed shut and Laura ran into the kitchen. She looked for something to defend herself with and found a knife. She sat on the floor, trembling, trying to rationalize what was happening. Her grandmother's stories echoed in her mind, and she began to believe that maybe they weren't just stories. The hours passed slowly. Laura couldn't sleep a wink, watching every shadow and every sound. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open. She had completely forgotten that place. With bated breath, she stepped closer and looked down. Bright eyes watched her from the darkness. She couldn't hold back a scream and ran for the exit, but something grabbed her by the ankle, making her fall. She felt an intense cold enveloping and weakening her. She tried to free herself, but an invisible force was dragging her down into the basement. Desperately, she clung to the railing, but her strength was waning. Then she heard a soft voice, barely a whisper, calling her name. She looked into the darkness and saw her grandmother. Her spirit, ethereal and glowing, was slowly approaching. "Laura, don't be afraid," she said gently. "You must release him." Confused and frightened, Laura didn't understand. "Release who?" she asked, but her grandmother disappeared. The invisible hand released her, and she stood there, trembling and sobbing. The basement door closed with a clang, and the house fell silent. Laura knew she had to do something. She remembered the diary and ran to get it. She read frantically until she found a page describing an ancient deliverance ritual. She needed to perform it to free the trapped spirit and end the curse. Gathering what courage he had left, he prepared everything he needed. He lit candles around the basement and recited the words of the ritual. As he moved forward, the shadows stirred and the whispers increased. She felt something powerful being released. Finally, a figure appeared before her. It was the spirit of a young man, with sad but grateful eyes. "Thank you," he whispered before vanishing into thin air. Laura fell to her knees, exhausted but relieved. The storm ceased and the first lights of dawn began to filter through the windows. Laura, still shivering, knew the night was over. She promised herself that she would never again be alone in that house. But she also understood that she had released something that had been waiting to rest in peace for a long time. With her heart still racing, she closed the diary and put it away. She knew the house held many more secrets, but now she was ready to face them. As she stepped out into the cool morning air, Laura felt that, for the first time, the house truly belonged to the living.